Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast, your weekly dose of talking about watching soccer on TV, online and apps. Coming up on episode 60, we discuss history being made with the race for the USSF Presidency. VAR strikes again in Europe. ESPN announced a few more details about ESPN Plus. Univision and FOX Sports announced new shows, the latest developments about the UK Premier League TV deal, and much more. Plus, we have letters from you, listeners, in our mailbag section. My name is Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Kartik Krishnaiyer. Kartik, how are you this week?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
I'm doing good. It's been a pretty exhausting weekend. We'll get more into this a little bit later in our feature topic of the show. But so much of the drama this week has been in regards to the race to become the next USSF president. You more than me. I mean, this is more your beat than it is mine. Although I'm watching it and very closely. But for you, it must have been a whirlwind of a week.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, when we get to what we've been watching, I'll admit, other than the Arsenal-Everton game where I got a brief respite, I have had football, soccer on all weekend and virtually comprehended none of it because the phone kept ringing, kept getting text messages, Twitter, whatever, about this USSF presidential race.
Right, yeah, and a lot of lawsuits being filed and all sorts of other things this week too. So let me kick off then this week, Kartik, in regards to what we've been watching. I'm not sure if you caught this game, but this was definitely, without any shadow of a doubt, my favorite game of the weekend, and that was Cologne against Dortmund. On Friday. It was the Friday 2:30 Eastern Time kickoff. This one, I didn't expect it to be this good, but what a fantastic match. Just end-to-end action. Dortmund eventually won 3-2 in this match. And I feel sorry for Cologne because every time I watch Cologne, it reminds me a little bit of Swansea in regards to a team near the bottom who's fighting to stay up, trying their best and actually playing some good brand of football. But whether it's the Europa League or whether it's the Bundesliga, it just seems that things aren't going their way.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, again, disheartening from a Dortmund perspective to see how poor they were defensively in that match. Dortmund, obviously, Batshuayi coming in, having an instant impact, scoring 2 goals, actually having a third chalked off, providing the assist for the other goal. But defensively, a mess. Cologne, who have now, believe it or not, given themselves an opportunity to escape the drop. As crazy as that sounds, they're now on 12 points. They're still cut adrift somewhat. I think 7 or 8 points from safety, but they have an opportunity and they showed a fighting spirit in this match. But boy, again, from a Dortmund perspective, a terrible defensive performance. Peter Stöger, Cologne's former manager, obviously leading Dortmund now. Have to mention this, Chris, to our listeners out there. Anytime Dortmund plays, if you like goals, if you like excitement, if you like bad giveaways, if you like good finishes, because it seems like people are more into entertainment than into quality football if you have to pick one or the other. Anytime Dortmund's on your program guide, you should watch the match or DVR it because it's always exciting.
Well, plus oftentimes, especially this season, goalkeeping mistakes. I mean, how many goalkeeping mistakes has Dortmund made this season? Whether it's in European competition or Bundesliga, it's incredible. But
yeah, I don't know how Berkey stays in that job. They have not gone out and gotten, since Weidenfeller began to fade, a really top class keeper. Particularly, Chris, when there's so many good German keepers out there. That's the real mystery to me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this match actually, it was Keith Costigan and Stu Holden commentating, and I think really those two together are the best combo. We've had Stuart Holden with John Strong for all sorts of other games, Champions League and US men's national team games, MLS games, etc. But to me, Stuart Holden is his best when he's paired with Keith Costigan, and I think that would be a natural fit for the World Cup. But if so, then who then fills in alongside John Strong if Landon Donovan isn't available? If Landon Donovan's going to be playing in Liga MX for Club Lyon, maybe they're thinking it's going to be John Strong and Stuart Holden, but that partnership I don't think is that strong to me when I listen to them together. The chemistry isn't there as much as it is with Costigan and Holden. I will add, Kartik, in this match, that there was a VAR incident in this one, and it's a good example of how difficult it can be, because there was a VAR incident in this Cologne-Dortmund game, and it was used to rule out a goal by Dortmund. But the decision was reached within seconds, which is great. So the Bundesliga seems to be very fast now these days in making quick decisions. But because of the commentators, because of Keith Costigan and Stuart Holden calling this game off a monitor, so they're not at the stadium. Obviously, they're in a studio in Los Angeles in a small office, kind of just looking at the TV, the same TVs that picture that we're seeing, the same video, and because the producer in Germany didn't kind of zoom in and show that, the referee had said, okay, let's go ahead and award this a goal. They didn't know if it was ruled out or not. So they had to kind of wait to see if the score, on the score ticker, whether that would change from, I think at that point it was 2-0, but whether it would go back to 1-0 or not. So they were completely blind to it, as were we, the viewers, the TV viewers. We're wondering, okay, that looks like it was disallowed, but we're not 100% sure. And to me, this comes back a lot to the things we've been talking about VAR. And I think it's one of those things is that you have to have the referees mic'd up. So we can hear what the referees are saying and the decision-making process and exactly what they decide. And at the same time, the people in the stadium can hear that, and then the people watching at home can hear that too. So we're all on the same page and we know what's happening. And you see this in rugby and in other sports where the refs are mic'd up. That takes it to a whole new level. I don't think soccer's ready for that quite yet, but I think that's the way that we're heading. But anyway, it was just an interesting thing I saw, and I just thought that was kind of one of the downfalls with VAR. It's just, again, the communication is if a VAR rules a goal onside, allow it or disallow it, how is that information communicated to the TV viewers and the people in the stadium? People in the stadium have an advantage. TV viewers have less of an advantage because we're relying on that TV producer to show us the video images of what happened.
Yeah, I think that it's a work in progress. And it's still something that seems very awkward every time. Just to your earlier point, I think Fox might want to place John Strong in the booth, or it's not the booth, right, because they're calling it off of monitors, for some of these Bundesliga games paired with Stu Holden coming down the stretch of the Bundesliga season, just to get that chemistry going, to your earlier point.
Yeah, that's the thing. Usually the Bundesliga, by this point, in the last 2 years, with Fox, have announced some big games on the over-the-air Fox network, or I think FXX was one year. So far, there's been none of that. I think there were some games earlier in the season that were on the big Fox, but so far we haven't heard anything. So maybe they're waiting for that before they do some of the Bundesliga games, because it seemed to be mostly John Strong's usually pulled in for more the high-profile matches. Some of the other matches I watched this weekend, Burnley against Man City. Of course, with NBC SN, we have Arlo White in the studio as the temporary presenter through till, I think, early March, while Rebecca's in South Korea for the Winter Olympics. And I think Arlo did pretty well. He does get a little bit, he does over-exaggerate a little bit too, Kartik. I'm not sure if you've noticed this. And oftentimes when you don't need to be, because the Burnley Man City game, it was a good game. It wasn't the most exciting game ever, but it was a good game. And Arlo White, right after the game ended, said, "We're still trying to catch our breath after that one." And I thought that was just a little bit exaggerated in terms of that. You don't have to sell it. We saw the same game that you saw. Just call it as it is. And yeah, it was exciting, but I don't think anyone was holding their breath on that one. Leicester against Swansea, I watched that one. The relegation survival campaign continues and is going according to plan for Swansea, so a well-deserved point there. Watched it on NBC Sports Gold. That day I was, I think one of my kids had a soccer game, so I was gone most of the day, came back and then played it and watched the whole game. No problems, enjoyed that. I did catch a couple of the rugby games, the Six Nations on NBC SN this weekend. I saw Wales against Scotland and Italy against England. And I think it's interesting because the level of coverage that they're giving to rugby, the standard of production, the studio, is just as good as the Premier League. And it just goes to show in terms of kind of just the high level of expectations at NBC. It seems to be across the network. It's not just one sport, but I was really impressed with the rugby coverage there. Now, Liverpool against Spurs, Kartik, on Sunday. First of all, I got to say, what a sensational match. This is a game that, again, I think one of my kids had a game on Sunday, so I came back and watched it on replay on the DVR from using Fubo. And after the game was over, I sat down with my wife and replayed the last 10 minutes of the game, and then sat down separately with my kids and said, okay, right, just watch this. Just watch what happens. And everyone was astonished. I mean, everyone was just absolutely aghast at the level of quality, the goals, the incidents, the drama, the excitement. And to me, I don't think it gets any better than this, Kartik. This was pure, unadulterated enjoyment. I mean, this is the best of the best, I think, of the Premier League. This is a fantastic match to watch.
Yeah, what are we talking about after the match?
Well, yeah, I was talking about the goals. I was talking about Mo Salah. I was talking about Wanyama. I was talking about those things. Yes, we will talk about the referee and officiating, but to me, I mean, that's been the talking point all week, right? But to me, the game itself and the match and the level of play, the pressing throughout this entire game was exceptional and just a joy to watch.
Yeah, the second half, certainly. I mean, I thought the Wanyama goal and Salah goals were two of the goals of the season. But the first half, I have to say, Spurs were what we've now come to unfortunately expect from them away to a big six side, which was very kind of tentative. Their pressing game didn't work. I felt like Liverpool was really dominating the midfield in the first half. I think a couple things changed that. One, Wanyama being inserted. To me, last season, he was such a key to Spurs, and his injury problems this season are one of the real explanations for why they've gone from second to fifth, and why Dele Alli, who plays in front of them in midfield, why his play has dropped off. And then the second thing would be the very un-Klopp-like decision to bring Joel Matip in for a midfielder. I'm trying to remember who got sacked. Maybe it was Milner. But a very, very strange decision to go defensive with a 1-0 lead, which was uncharacteristic of Klopp. And those two decisions in the second half, the two substitutions, one by Pochettino positive, one by Klopp very negative, I think made the game for the last 30 minutes exactly a spectacle, as you said. But unfortunately, we're not really talking about that. I might be the first person to talk about these tactical changes that took place. Well, maybe not the first person, but the first person, one of the few people, because all the talk was about John Moss after the match.
Yeah, so let's go there. So with the officiating, I must say that if NBC ever wanted to pull in one of the contributors that they have, Mark Clattenburg, this was the time to do it. And then that's the difficult thing that they have with Mark, is that he comes in from time to time and probably will come in again at some point in the season. But it's one of those things that it's you never know what's going to happen. It could be a quiet day officiating-wise, but that's the moment where you'd love to have a live TV hookup with him to have him come on post-match, from a studio, wherever he's at, to share his opinions. I thought, Kartik, in terms of the officiating, especially these controversial decisions in this match, that all of them were correct. And I think the Liverpool fans are probably getting ready to send me hate mail, but I think in each of the separate occasions, the correct decision was made. I think it was a little bit fortunate, a little bit lucky on one of them, that the offside decision in terms of the ruling on that one. But I did think, though, too, Kartik, it was really interesting. You had the NBC Sports studio team, so I think Robbie Mustoe, Robbie Earle, all saying that that definitely should have been offside, the Harry Kane decision. But they're not referees. They're not match officials. So Sky Sports post-match had Dermot Gallagher on, and Dermot said that the calls were correct. Of course, there's a lot of interpretation on that Harry Kane incident, whether or not Lovren deliberately tried to play the ball, and we can go into a lot of detail about this, a lot deeper. But I just thought it was interesting from the TV coverage perspective of it, the difference of opinions. I saw some of beIN Sports coverage from the Middle East with Andy Gray and the studio teams there, and they were saying that, that should have been definitely offside. What do you think?
No, I think it was an attempt to play the ball by Lovren. And this, I've been very, through the years, very kind of outspoken on this point, including going back now more than 10 years, more than a decade, to the U.S.-Canada game in the Gold Cup in Chicago, where Oguchi Onyewu, I thought pretty clearly tried to play a ball that resulted in a Canadian goal that was chalked off, I think, by Julien de Guzman, a goal that was, to me, perfectly legal, because if the defender tries to play the ball, then you have this issue. We had the opposite call made, the same call as the Kane call in the playoff game. You might remember this when the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, who of course I worked for, played in Minnesota in 2014 in the NASL Championship, when there was an attempt to play the ball by the Minnesota defender. Ball falls to Martin Nunez for Fort Lauderdale. He scores the goal. The game goes to extra time. Fort Lauderdale wins, but it was extremely controversial, at least in the American soccer community at the time, and I think misinterpretation of the rule. That the Nunez goal was a legal goal, probably, and I think certainly the Kane penalty was. I have to say, I think the calls were all correct. Liverpool fans aren't going to like that, but the defense for Van Dijk is very weak. Okay, so he is not entitled to that space behind him, right? This assumption that he didn't know Lamela was going to occupy that space is just really kind of a strange defense to me. And so I thought that was a pretty clear penalty. Again, I think Moss and Mark Clattenburg, who was the fourth official, and the ARs, they were trying to get a sense of whether there may have been an offside involved, right? But the actual call itself, I don't think was controversial, at least in my book. Now, the question you could have is, do you call something like that in extra time, in stoppage time, in a game of this magnitude? Sometimes referees swallow their whistle because of the circumstance. But was that a foul? Yeah, I think 9 people out of 10 would admit, if they're being truly objective, that was a foul.
Yeah, I think part of the issue, though, too, Kartik, is that you have soccer fans and you have broadcasters that are not match officials and don't understand all of the rules of the game. And oftentimes, so if you go on social media after this game, and it's still to this day, I mean, I went on Facebook, I think yesterday, and there's still Liverpool fans and groups just going, this is ridiculous, this is kind of, the Eddie Smart, the assistant referee, the way he pumps his fist as if he's like a Spurs supporter. When I think really what he was doing was just like, hey, I got the call right. That's a huge call to make at that moment in the game, in such a big game with the world watching. Pat on the back for him for getting the decision correct. I think that's what he was kind of saying to himself. Not that he was like, yes, a penalty against Liverpool, like Spurs got a chance here to tie it up. From a TV perspective, Kartik, this is fascinating, though, too, seeing John Moss and having the cameras so close to John Moss and Eddie Smart and being able to actually overhear what they were saying. That was illuminating for me. That's something we extremely rarely get to see. And like I talked about beforehand, I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to hear the rationale that the referees are going through when they're discussing a call, so that we can better understand if the correct decision is being made or not. And in this case, it was a slip of the tongue from John Moss, but a very, very revealing one, where they're discussing the situation, and John Moss on his radio calls over to Martin Atkinson, the fourth official, and said, Martin, did you see that on TV? Did you catch that on TV? Was that the right call? And Martin didn't reply, which is, thank God he didn't reply, because that opens things up completely, Kartik. It makes you wonder. I mean, the PGMOL said that was a mistake, that a slip of the tongue, that he didn't mean to do that. But it makes you wonder, Kartik, how often has this been done in other games where they've gone to the fourth official and say, hey, did you sneak a peek and did you see anything on TV? Because, they're helpless. I mean, they have no TV replay to look at. We, the TV viewers, have far more slow-mos, different angles. We've got all the evidence, and they've got just the real-time evidence. What a tough job it is for them, but that is extremely revealing. What do you think, Kartik? Is this something that that's given us an idea of exactly what's happening in some of these big matches?
Yeah, I suspect it happens more often than we think, but it's a slippery slope, isn't it? I mean, you go back to the 2006 World Cup final, right, between Italy and France. We know television replay was used to send off Zidane, or was used as a tool to send off Zidane, and I think since then there's probably been incidents like this, not ones that ended up in 2-minute stoppages, but I suspect this is happening more often than we think.
Yeah, and FIFA to this day still says that that the TVs weren't used in that World Cup final, and we all know it was. They had it on the big giant screens in the stadium and showed the incident, so it's impossible that the referees didn't see that, and that of course influenced their decision to send off Zidane. But yeah,
it's worth noting in Major League Baseball in the United States. I don't know if this is the case anymore because I don't follow baseball, but at one time baseball had a very strong umpires union, and these sorts of controversial replays were not allowed to be shown in the stadiums, so that umpires weren't harassed or influenced. I'm not sure if that's something that the authorities in football want to think about, quite honestly. And again, I don't know how strong the referees union is, but at one time, the umpires union in Major League Baseball, all the unions in Major League Baseball were stronger than the other unions in American sports. So I remember that distinctly, that controversial place you couldn't watch. And I used to not like it at the time as a fan. Now looking back, I think that was probably a good thing.
And that's the same way in soccer, though, too, Kartik, because like in these games where you have the TV replays on the giant screen TVs, is that they're not allowed to show controversial incidents in the stadiums. And I think that 2006 World Cup final, I think that was a mistake, that they didn't mean to show that incident up on the big screen. But because it could start a riot depending on how things go. But I don't know. It was just a fascinating watch of a game, and the officiating made it even more interesting. Just a little bit disappointed with NBC's coverage of this one. But again, it's analysis. They're asking for quick decisions, quick feedback from their analysts, and they're giving them. But I think in some ways, actually, Kartik, in this instance, such a rare instance, this is when you need a Dr. Joe that Fox uses. My thing with Dr. Joe is he's overused. Like he's just been pulled in to give a decision or give it some feedback on a goal that is, it's a common sense decision. We don't need him to explain that. Something like this is something we need him to explain. And this might happen once every 2 or 3 months. But I think NBC needs to kind of think about having some access to that. And oftentimes they've gone to PGMOL in the past, post-match, and to ask further input or feedback on certain decisions. I missed the post-match, so I don't know if they did that. But it's a fascinating time in the coverage of soccer, really.
Yeah, and congratulations to Dr. Joe. He's finally getting inducted into the National Soccer Hall of Fame this Friday night in Orlando.
All right, Kartik. So a couple of the matches I watched this weekend. I watched Atleti against Valencia. This was in the La Liga on beIN Sports, and a match that I thought was going to be fantastic to watch. It was kind of a damp squid, really. It was a beautiful goal by Angel Correa to win the match 1-0 for Atleti. But Atleti, the way that they play, even at home, it's very much, just play very conservatively, get the one goal, hold on for the win, and that's it. But still, they got the 3 points. That's all they want. I did watch The Extra again on beIN Sports on Sunday. And yet again, I just really enjoyed the coverage on this one. They had the analysis from that day's matches, as well as highlights with Kay Murray, Gary Bailey, and Thomas Rongin. And again, they had the coach's corner going into more detail about some of the plays that happened in that match. Really enjoyable. I've been watching more and more of that. And then early week, we had Watford, Chelsea, Swansea, Notts County, and then Spurs against Newport, and watched all those games. And I enjoyed the Swansea one probably more than others. But actually, the Watford-Chelsea game was really entertaining too. And just to see Chelsea's demise right now under Conte is I hate to see teams kind of go that way, but it's again difficult times at Chelsea, and it's it's good television.
I suppose so, Chris, but it's very good television. But I think Chelsea are a team that indicate to me, look, this thing has infected their cup competition performances too. Obviously, they made hard work of 2 legs against Norwich, a replay, and then extra time and penalty kicks, and then they were eliminated by Arsenal. In spite of, in my opinion, getting the rub of the green from the officials in both legs of that tie, they were eliminated, and then their league performances. Let's just consider this for a minute, okay? I've complained that the Premier League has become too predictable this season, but now Chelsea is pulling back that predictability. They lose 3-0 at home to Bournemouth, which, and I think in Eddie Howe's 7 years, or actually plus, so if you take his first, maybe almost a decade of managing Bournemouth now, beyond matches that immediately got them promoted, was the best result they've had, and probably the best performance they've had. Now they go to Vicarage Road, which is just down the road. You know, for the Watford is inside the M25, so it's a short bus ride from West London, and they get absolutely hammered. Look, Bakayoko got sent off with that second yellow card, Chris. My opinion was that he didn't want to stay on the pitch. He was so abject in the first 30 minutes. It wasn't just Bakayoko's performance wasn't just rated on his 2 yellow cards and his sending off. Mm-hmm. There is it's ineffectual in Chelsea's midfield right now. And then you don't inspire much confidence. As much as I like Danny Drinkwater, I don't like Ross Barkley as a player. I've been sour on him for a while. But as much as I like Danny Drinkwater, you don't inspire much confidence if you're an aspiring side, you're the defending Premier League champions, to have signed those 2 guys. I think Giroud is a much better signing, a higher level player. But again, I don't know that it's that useful to have Giroud now. They're not really competing for anything, although I guess they're still competing to finish in the top 4. So they're going to need Giroud's goals at some point. But what a mess.
Absolutely. All right, Kartik, let's move on to TV streaming news.
Yeah, big week of TV streaming news for us. According to the Financial Times, the Premier League researched the possibility of selling online rights via subscription model separate from their actual TV deals. But they came to the conclusion that the TV model for selling rights is still the most lucrative, which it has been for their entire existence, by the Premier League even began. Also, the article points out that Amazon, reports that Amazon and Facebook met with the Premier League for discussions in addition to Sky Sports and BT Sports in the UK. That goes along with our own reporting about the FA Cup, that the FA is exploring the use potentially of Amazon and Facebook. The bidding process for Premier League TV and streaming rights in the UK starts this week. And by the time you hear this podcast, it's quite possible winning bids might have been announced. It's possible. I'm not sure if it will be, although I am hearing next week, likely, Chris. One other point on this, just remind our American listeners, because NBC got an unprecedented deal, which we talked about with Lee Dixon 2 weeks ago. 6 years. Premier League never negotiates deals like that. It's the only deal in their history they've negotiated over a term longer than 3 years in a major market. There was no U.S. Tender or rights bid this time. NBC keeps it for the next period as well.
Yeah, and for the NBC, I think that's a smart move, Kartik, because if the contracts were up for renewal right now, you'd have Amazon and Facebook and others competing against NBC, and probably upping the actual cost of that. I mean, we'll see that in the UK too, as far as it's usually BT and Sky Sports for the most part that are the main bidders. But if with Amazon and Facebook, with all the money that they may have, or that they do have, that could really increase the amount of the TV rights there too. So timing is everything. We'll have to wait and see what happens here. I mean, Sky Sports, you would expect to get the majority of those games and then maybe shared among the others, but you never know. Now, another part of this TV deal, Kartik, that was mentioned is that a winter break was under this discussion under this new TV deal. Now, whether or not this is going to happen, we'll have to wait and see. But I think it's a mistake, Kartik, because what's going to happen if they do decide to do a winter break for the next TV deal? which is like 2019 to 2022, is what's going to happen. You have a winter break over the winter. You know that all these clubs are going to go to either the Middle East or to the United States to play friendlies. You can imagine Manchester United would probably take that time to play, like, say, 2 or 3 games over that period. And if anything, the players are probably going to be more fatigued because they've got travel, plus they're going to be playing these games when they could be just making short bus trips from Manchester to Liverpool or wherever it may be in the UK. I just think it's a mistake. I understand what they're trying to do in theory, but if the clubs are the ones making the decisions, I think this is a bad move.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, Univision Deportes, and this is to me very fascinating because we've talked about this element of maybe viewers sticking with old rights holders for analysis. Univision Deportes has launched a brand new World Cup show entitled Mission Russia that will air every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Univision Deportes app, online at univisiondeportes.com and Univision Deportes Radio. The primetime show will take viewers to Russia, featuring exclusive interviews with football stars, in-depth analysis, special reports as the 32 teams prepare for this summer's tournament. The show will feature legends like Risto Stoichkov, Ivan Zamorano, Pavel Pardo, Enrique Borja, and Felix Fernandez. So a challenge to Telemundo right there, the new rights holders in Spanish language.
Yeah, and just as we talked about last week, is that ESPN is sending Sebastian Salazar and Hercules Gomez to Russia also to cover the Mexico team in English for ESPN. So there's going to be, just because Univision and ESPN lost the rights to the World Cup, that's a good sign that they're still planning on coverage. We'll have to wait and see what beIN Sports plans on doing in the United States. As well as NBC. NBC, if they'll have some coverage or try to push people to Telemundo, which is part of the same company. Next up is that Ray Hudson and Phil Shane are going to be calling the Chelsea-Barcelona Champions League game on February the 20th on beIN Sports Canada. So beIN Sports has the Champions League rights in Canada, and this is the first time that I believe that Ray Hudson and Phil Shane are going to be used for this one. So they're going to be actually commentating on that game, the Chelsea-Barcelona game. So if you're in Canada, if you love Ray and Phil, here you go. And if you don't like them, sorry. But again, I love them. But they're definitely, it's kind of a love-hate relationship, but still some good news there for soccer fans in Canada through beIN Sports.
So this week, Alexi Lalas launched the State of the Union podcast. If you didn't check it out, you probably should. In June, Alexi Lalas' State of the Union podcast heads to Russia for a special World Cup edition set to premiere Tuesday, June 12th. The World Cup episodes will feature comprehensive tournament previews, analysis, and player interviews live from Moscow. So that should be pretty exciting. And again, I would recommend our listeners check out this week's episode, obviously after they listen to us, right? But check out Lalas's debut pod. I don't think you'll be disappointed.
So big news in Italy, and that is that MediaPro, which is a Spanish company, has acquired the domestic TV rights for Serie A in Italy for 2018 to 2021. And the amount of money that they're paying is just over 1 billion euros. It's a big deal because the traditional TV partners, broadcast partners in Italy have been Sky Sports Italia and Mediaset. But now with MediaPro buying those rights, we'll have to wait and see what happens, where those end up, if somebody actually then they sublicense those to one of the TV providers. But still, big news from Italy there.
Okay, let me move on and talk about Netflix. Now, we've talked a lot about the Manchester City documentary that Amazon Prime is streaming, but Netflix is actually debuting their Juventus documentary, which is going to be really cool, on February 16th. So that's next week. An insider look at the club entitled First Team Juventus. It'll take a look at the club on and off the pitch as they attempt to win a 7th straight Italian title and achieve Champions League glory season 1.
Yeah, that one's going to be interesting too, Kartik, because he's got the Juventus Spurs game coming up next week too. So that'll be, to me, I love those types of fly-on-the-wall documentaries, it'll be interesting to see how much access they do have. I mean, if we were going into the dressing rooms, the changing rooms, if we're seeing things that, I mean, of course, your favorite, Kartik, right? Which is your favorite soccer documentary fly-on-the-wall of all time?
QPR, 4-year plan. I still watch it once every 6 months.
Yeah.
I just watched it a few months ago again.
Yeah, and that's one too that for QPR fans, or even QPR, the actual the executives, they probably look at that and go like, "Oh, this is so embarrassing." But it's realistic; it's the real deal. So hopefully, with the Juventus one, we get all of that, whether it's the good parts or the bad parts, but we get to see what it's really like inside that club, rather than some kind of really. Yeah, I mean, sterile, kind of everything is rosy, everything is great, very edited version, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, that one I'll definitely be watching. Last week, we talked about ESPN Plus, and we revealed some of the information that we do have. This week, with an interview on CNBC, ESPN announced a little bit more detail, and that is that ESPN Plus is going to launch this spring. According to one of our sources, it's going to be released in late April. Or early May. It's going to miss the launch of the MLS season. So MLS Live will continue, but will probably be rolled into ESPN Plus at a later date. But the big news is that the price point is going to start at $4.99 a month, which is a fantastic price. We'll have to wait and see what that actually does include. Does that include everything? Or does that just include your basic package? That we'll have to wait and see. So the ESPN Plus is going to offer ESPN and ESPN2 streams from that, provided you have a cable or satellite subscription to those services. But in the other content that they'll have is going to be a live selection of sports events not available on ESPN or ESPN2. So if you're a cord cutter, you could pay the $4.99 and access that. It will include MLS. It's probably going to include Championship next season, as well as some other rights, but we'll have to wait and see. But that's what we know so far.
My sources around USL are telling me USL will have some involvement in that as well. So for fans of that league, be prepared for that. $4.99 a month. That's a price point that was lower than I thought. So although that's a starting package, let's state that. But that sounds better than we thought. Now, speaking of pay packages, YouTube TV has finally been added to the Roku and Apple TV devices this week. Last week, you may recall, YouTube TV signed an exclusive deal to broadcast LAFC games to YouTube TV subscribers in the LA market. And Chris, let me tell you, the reaction to this thing has been all over the map. Probably something we'll delve into in a feature topic of the week once those games start airing, because the speculation and theories about it are all over the place. Some people love it, and some people just hate it that LAFC has done that.
Yeah, if I'm a LAFC fan and I live in Florida and I want to watch those matches through YouTube TV, I can't. I would be able to through MLS Live and do it that way, but then I may not be interested in watching all those other games from all those other teams. But right now, that's the way that the US TV model is set up, especially for the major sports in this country, where it is very regionalized. It's not kind of a national rights package, so it does get it gets complicated. And out of all of the soccer leagues in the United States, Major League Soccer is probably, I would say, probably the most complicated one, which is one of the reasons. So the past six or 7 months, I've been writing a lot of how-to guides about how to find whichever league it is or whichever club it is on US television or streaming, and going into a lot of details. One of the reasons I haven't done the Major League Soccer one yet is it is so confusing, and it's changing all the time. But anyway, it's just some insight there. All right, let's move on to TV ratings, Kartik. We don't have all of the numbers, but we're getting them day by day, and we will post them on worldsoccertalk.com on the homepage as soon as they all come in. I do know that there's some big numbers for Liga MX this week, and we'll be posting those shortly. But some of the other numbers that came in, we had Arsenal against Everton on NBC on Saturday. That had 877,000 viewers on NBC. We were waiting to get the numbers from Telemundo and Universo on that to see if it did go over the million mark. The Liverpool Spurs game, best game for the Premier League all weekend on NBCSN. That one had 692,000 viewers. And look at some of these other numbers here too. You had Espanyol against Barcelona, the Barcelona derby. Now on beIN Sports, the English language beIN Sports, it had 68,000 viewers. We're expecting some much bigger numbers on the beIN Sports and Espanyol to have those numbers probably over 500,000. But we'll have to wait and see once we get those in. We'll post them. Any other numbers here, Kartik, that would jump out at you?
Not really. Kind of a whole week, and I think we're so used to seeing Spanish numbers attached to the English numbers, we're going to just have to wait for those to really analyze this.
Exactly. All right, listener mailbag. We've got a bunch of feedback this week. The first one is from Nuke, and he sent in this tweet. He says, great points about NBC Sports Gold on last week's podcast. I paid the $50 since day one, but don't see alerts or push notifications for content. So I have only gone there once or twice. Can't watch what they can't market. That's a good point. That's an excellent point, actually. That is something it's one of the, especially these days, it's kind of a basic feature that you would think that they would have added. They do, however, have a email newsletter that goes out each week, and usually goes out on the Friday and has a schedule of the games that are going to be on NBC Sports Gold. And it does include in there just kind of a schedule of some of the other programming that they have, whether it's the Premier League News or Premier League Today or the preview show, review show, etc. That's been helpful. But oftentimes for me too, Kartik, it's one of those things that I think you're better at this, but I always forget to log on to NBC Sports Gold during the week. And then on the weekend, it's a godsend. I'm watching it all the time. But during the week, things are busy and I forget. And push notifications or alerts would be perfect. Now, Faye Sheridan sent in this tweet. Faye said, I'm a PlayStation Vue and NBC Sports Gold subscriber. NBC Sports Gold has screwed me twice this year on streaming matches. First, I wanted to watch Manchester City replay of a match broadcast over the air on NBC. They would not let me do it because PlayStation Vue does not have an agreement with NBC for over-the-air rights in my region. So let me just stop right there. It's not just PlayStation Vue, but it's across all streaming providers. This is something new that NBC Sports did this season, is that in previous years, if you had a subscription to NBC Sports SN, you'd be able to watch live or on replay matches that were on NBC over the air, the big NBC network, logging into the NBC Sports app and then watching it using your PlayStation credentials or Sling TV or Fubo or whatever, and be able to watch those matches too. This year they stopped that, so that was a big change, unfortunately. But as we saw, and we talked about last week, Fubo is one that's been adding, I think they're now in over 70% of US households for NBC Sports, the network. So that's NBC network. So that's something to consider. Faye goes on to say that then on Wednesday, January 31st, the City match against West Brom was on NBC Sports Gold, which I have a subscription to. So I go to watch the game on replay today, which is a couple of days later, because I can't watch during the week due to work. Guess what? The idiots at NBC Sports Gold do not have it available for replay, even for subscribers like me. Guess they are too busy saving on the cost of those bills and have to remove it before the weekend. And let me stop right there too. What happened really, and this is difficult, this is really unfortunate. In Faye's case, it's a shame because we had so many matches that week. I think that was when we had matches on the Tuesday and the Wednesday. I don't think there was a game on the Thursday, but Tuesdays and Wednesdays there's midweek matches, and then the next round of matches start then early on the Saturday morning. So on NBC Sports Gold, you would have those games available on replay for the Thursday and probably part of the Friday, but then they would be removed because then they're getting ready for the new weekend. And this is really, I think, more of a restriction on the Premier League. The Premier League's kind of saying to NBC Sports that you can't have these games up there for a very long period of time. It's a set amount of time. And unfortunately, when games come so close together, it really doesn't give you a lot of time to watch them before the next round of games start back up. Anyway, so the person goes on, Faye says, I hate NBC Sports Gold with a passion, more than I ever hated any other vendor ever. NBC Sports Gold are pure evil. It's not about the dollars. It's about being able to watch the match when you're ready to stream it. Please, Will Soccer Talk, tell everyone else on the website and podcast, never subscribe to NBC Sports Gold. So I think we're both NBC Sports Gold subscribers. I had to do it this year because of Swansea. If I didn't subscribe to NBC Sports Gold, I probably would miss about 60% of the games. I'm not a big fan of NBC Sports Gold by any means, and I think it was a mistake that they went ahead and did it this way by not providing access to everything. But their hands are tied to a certain extent where they can't show everything and keep everything. I will say one more time about Fubo. The good thing about Fubo is on the DVR is you can keep those recordings forever. So if you watch, you record like I did the Liverpool Spurs game from this past Sunday, which is on NBCSN. I had that on DVR. If I go back into my DVR today, it's still there. And actually, if I go back into my DVR 6 months from now, it's still there too. That's a huge advantage. And as they add more of the NBC network channels, which they've added in my market, I can do the same thing too, and I can go in there and just DVR it and leave it there. So that's a big advantage, and it's really, but again, it doesn't help on the NBC Sports Gold side, and hopefully that's something they'll readdress this summer and decide whether or not to expand that program or just do away with it. My guess is that they'll continue it, but we'll change it slightly. We'll have to wait and see what happens there, though. All right, Kartik, next up is Anthony Bello. He sent in this email. Anthony says, hi, guys. I am writing to defend VAR and the complaints you guys have. Let's start with Kartik, what he said last week. In my 25 years of watching soccer, sports, I have never heard a person say, I think we should ditch replay because it's going to make the game run over the time that the network allotted. Sports are live events. They're usually going to run over the time the network allots for. And if the networks had that concern, the NFL would be nowhere near television because there is always a possibility of a bad injury that could make it run over. So before I go on, Kartik, any comments on that one?
Yeah, I think that might be right in terms of fans, but I think there's also the consideration of DVRing and programming. I'll use this example from last night. Auburn plays Texas A&M, very big game in the SEC, college basketball. There is a foul with 3.5 seconds left, or it was actually 2 seconds left on the clock. SportsCenter is coming up next. The SportsCenter anchors, Kenny Mayne and Steve Levy, are kind of joking. Maybe we're going to be here. You'll get to us. There's, I would say, like a 2 or 3 minute replay delay to look at the monitor, see if the call was correct, because the guy, you have to know the rules of basketball, college basketball, but the guy who appeared to have taken a charge on Auburn was actually had the part of his foot in the line for the cylinder, which meant it was a blocking foul. So that meant Texas A&M got free throws, and then they had to look at the clock. So this delay took like 3 or 4 minutes, and I think they've become so accustomed to it, they joke about it. But I've heard some complaints in the industry about, well, how do we properly program when we don't know about replays and that sort of thing. So I get it that maybe fans aren't concerned about it, but from a programming perspective and in the industry, there are some concerns about it. And also, if you set your DVR, there are concerns about it. If you're particularly like me, because I don't watch the NFL, so it doesn't bother me. I didn't even watch the Super Bowl, if I'm honest with you. But I do watch a lot of college basketball, and it's happening all the time. And then you'll tape a game, and you'll get 20 minutes of the previous game, and then you miss the first 8 minutes until the second TV timeout of the game you're DVRing. It's just it's a problem, I think. And some other people have said that to me.
Anthony goes on to say, as for the rest of the complaints, I just don't get it. Do you guys want the calls to be wrong? If we have the technology to correct a call that is obvious, that's an obvious howler, why shouldn't we use it? He says, maybe it's an American sports fan in me, but I want the correct call, not a shorter game. And I definitely don't want to live in the romance of bad calls. The fans of soccer may disagree, that's fine, but I am willing to bet on this. As long as the officials are bad and there's no recourse to overturn the call, the American sports fan won't look at soccer seriously. if you guys keep dragging your feet and the calls stay bad, we are going to ask this question. Why should we waste the only morning we have to sleep in to watch our games, watch our teams get screwed? I would say, Kartik, I don't have an issue with VAR. The issue I have with many issues with VAR. The only major issue I have with VAR is the amount of time it's taken. So, and this has happened a bunch of times the last 2 months, is that something happens, something controversial happens, we see the replay, and within like 5 seconds we go, that was a correct decision, or that was it was a foul or whatever it may be. That was a handball or whatever. Now, the amount of time it takes for the referee to radio into the TV crew and the video assistant referee, and by the time the actual, especially for the FA so far, for the Premier League, for the League Cup and the FA Cup, it can take sometimes 45 seconds or more for the decision to come back. And I'm sitting there going what's the holdup? Is it the technology? Is it the technology that they're using, or are they being extra careful and looking at every single replay when it's something that seems to be common sense? That's the issue I have. The issue is the hold up of the game, and it seems to be taking too long to make these decisions. Yes, I want the correct decision, but I want it to be in a speedy way where it's not being rushed, but it's being looked at and made in a shorter amount of time that it is being done so today.
That's absolutely right. And I think that the major thing to understand about soccer versus other sports is that this is a sport without natural timeouts. It's a free-flowing game. I think the constant replays and stoppages would be a problem, and things need to be decided quickly to keep that continue the flow of that game. Now, actually, referencing again college basketball, it's been incorporated in the game now that replays end up stifling momentum for teams and giving coaches maybe whose teams are on the back foot. That's a soccer expression. And just we'll go with it. An additional timeout, a chance to regroup. So it may change. It may end up working out in some respects, but it does change the dynamic of the game. There's no two ways about that. From watching college basketball as closely as I have for 35 years, I've seen as the TV monitors were incorporated in that sport, how the trajectory of games have changed and how momentum swings can be stifled more easily because of replays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe we're just uncomfortable with change, and it's something that college basketball fans and coaches in college basketball and players have had to adjust to. Maybe that happens in soccer as well.
Yeah, I'm okay with change. I'm all for change. But to me, one of the beauties of soccer is that end-to-end action, that flow of the game going, down one end of the pitch, and then all of a sudden the counter-attack, and now it goes to the other side. And it's, for the most part, it's almost non-stop unless there's a foul or a free kick or, a throw-in, those sorts of things. But in some matches, it's going to be where there are going to be some incidents happening, whether it's a push or whether it's a trip or whatever it may be. The level of use of VAR has to be looked at where it can't be used all the time. It has to be only used for key decisions that are going to be controversial, that you need that TV replay to make sure that the decision was done correctly.
I think one way we can solve this, and this is traditionalists get angry about this, is you add fifth and sixth officials that have some sort of decision-making power or some sort of decision-influencing power on the field, right behind the goals, because really the game is now too fast, and the expanse of a soccer pitch is too much to depend on three officials with decision-making authority or decision-influencing authority. It's really that's what the trouble comes down to. So think about this: basketball. Think about how small that court is. You have three officials. Soccer, you essentially have three officials. Think about American football. You have officials all over the field, right? You have a head referee, but it really is a problem when it comes back down to that. And this is where the traditionalism, and I completely agree with Anthony, the traditionalism of soccer and the conservatism of FIFA is coming into play.
Yeah, and FIFA is still yet to make a decision about the World Cup this summer. And I think they really have to be really careful about this one, Kartik, because it could come back to bite them if they're deciding to move forward with VAR. It depends which VAR system that they use. Maybe they use their own. That's going to be probably different also. But I mean, it's okay to use VAR as long as it's timely. And also it's making the correct decisions. It could cause some huge controversies, more controversies than without it.
Unless there's the intent of some people within FIFA to sabotage the whole process of technology. Now, that sounds very conspiracy theory-like, but I'm airing it because people have said it. Or enough people have said it, enough people I respect have said it, knowing FIFA the way some of these folks do, that perhaps might be part of the agenda.
Yeah, definitely. All right, one more thing, and that's from Dave Brunk, and he sent in this email. He says, "Hey, fellas, I continue to enjoy the pods, especially all the interviews you've done lately. Excellent content. Looking forward to hearing more on ESPN's streaming service coming out soon, and also your coverage of the USSF election. My son and I did a soccer trip to London over the holiday period and got to see 3 matches. All right, Kartik, get ready for this one. So he says, we started with Brentford against Sheffield Wednesday, which that's one ground I've seen. I think it was a Heathrow. Every time,
it's the closest ground to Heathrow Airport. I was about to say.
Yeah, that. And it's also I think the only ground in England that has a pub on each corner of the ground. So it's a unique place. I would have loved to gone to see Brentford against Sheffield Wednesday. So hats off to Dave there. Then he went on to see AFC Wimbledon against Southend, which would have been a great atmosphere with the Dons and that would have been a match I would have loved to have seen too. And Dave says, and he concluded it with West Ham against West Brom at the Olympic Stadium. He says, we had a blast, and all of the home teams won their matches. So hats off to him and his son. That's definitely, I'm sure, a trip that he'll never forget.
Excellent.
Listeners, if you do have any feedback for us or any questions that you have, feel free to contact us. We'd love to read those out on air. You can reach us via email at web, W-E-B, at worldsoccertalk.com. You can tweet us at worldsoccertalk or send us a message through Facebook at facebook.com/worldsoccertalk. Moving on, Kartik, to our featured topic of the week, and this is that this weekend, both you and I will be heading to Orlando for the United States Soccer Federation annual general meeting. And there's going to be lots of meetings there, but the most important one of all is going to be the National Council meeting on Saturday, where they will be voting all the different parties throughout the United States, all the different councils and associations and voting blocks will be voting in the USSF presidential election. Of course, there are 8 candidates running. This year's AGM is going to be the largest in history. So history will be made. They're going to have 632 registered attendees. It's going to be a massive event. And this is going to probably change US soccer moving forward, Kartik, I think, in many ways. Whether the reform candidates win or the establishment wins, I think things are going to be different from here on. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that this election has been much more active and much more controversial than I think a lot of people thought at the outset. There has been some convergence in themes from all the candidates, with the exception of Kathy Carter, particularly about the role of Soccer United marketing, which of course she is the on leave of absence president of Soccer United marketing, which is, for those who don't know, a marketing company whose equity is held by MLS owners, who has all of the media contracts for the United States, for the domestic contracts for U.S. soccer, television, marketing, etc. And they have done so in a process. They have obtained those contracts in a process that many find controversial. So, and the allocation of monies, and you can go back and read some of the things that we have talked about on World Soccer Talk. Both Chris, you and I have written about it through the years. The allocation of monies coming from the sum contract, where those revenues go. Do they go back to the national teams that generated the revenues, or do they go into the pockets of Major League Soccer? And that has been perhaps the biggest issue of the campaign. Now, when the campaign started, we thought there would be a lot of the polarizing issues were 4 issues, which were pro-rel, calendar change, solidarity payments, and the technical direction of the U.S. men's and women's national teams. Those 4 issues are still prominent, but they have taken a backseat to this discussion of some and the money that Soccer United marketing is generating or perhaps keeping. Strangely, Major League Soccer pushed Kathy Carter into the race for the presidency. I think it's because maybe the established candidate, Carlos Cordero, who's been a board member for 10 years of U.S. Soccer, independent director for 8 of those years, the last 2 years as the vice president of U.S. Soccer behind Sunil Gulati, that Cordero is an establishment figure when it comes to pro-rel, when it comes to calendar change, when it comes to solidarity payments, but not when it comes to the Soccer United marketing deal. He has now raised some very vocal and, in my opinion, valid concerns about it. Mm-hmm. So, and we talked about this on previous pods, and this week, Cordero reiterated that in his conversation with Grant Wall on the Planet Football podcast. Don Garber has responded. So the race has been kind of defined by Soccer United marketing and Kathy Carter's presence in the race. I was on Sirius XM the other night with Brian Dunseth and John Harkes and talked at length about some of the other cross-cutting cleavages in this race. Just I don't want to summarize the full half an hour I was on with them. I don't want to go through the whole half an hour I was with them. I'll just summarize real quickly. You have 2 very prominent insurgent candidates, Eric Winalda and Kyle Martino, both of whom are I think very familiar to our listeners because of their media work. We've interviewed Kyle Martino on this podcast. We did not get the opportunity to interview Eric Winalda. But they're talking a lot about the pro-rel, the solidarity payments, even the NASL, which now has filed a major antitrust lawsuit against U.S. Soccer. Second lawsuit they filed this week against independent directors, or the directors and independent directors of U.S. Soccer. Then you've got Carter and Cordero, who I've mentioned as establishment candidates. One possibility I raised on Sirius is that these middle-of-the-road, probably leaning more to the insurgent side candidate, Steve Gans, who's a prominent Boston attorney, very impressive Boston attorney, was actually responsible for first getting John W. Henry involved in the Premier League and has worked with the Premier League and is very, very connected in youth soccer circles. Or Mike Vinograd, former player. Well, Steve Gans is a former player also. Mike Vinograd, former player, who's now a corporate lawyer in New York, founded the Staten Island Vipers, a Division II team, which is now defunct, but was in Division II at one point, and also has represented a number of youth clubs as an attorney. That one of these 2 might emerge in the later stages of the voting process. So it's a fascinating situation. I think we've now, though, Chris, come to a realization. Everybody puts so much on this election, and I have to say it's consumed most of my energy for 4 months. We've now come to a realization this week, talking to a number of folks around the game. Okay, the election is one thing, but there's a lot that has to be done that won't be determined by this. And that maybe we've all kind of lost our focus the last few months because we thought, okay, if we get the right president, we can change things. Or if we get the wrong president, things are over. Mm-hmm. No, a realization is beginning to creep in on both sides, the reform side and the establishment side, that, okay, this is important, but it's part of a larger process.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do still think that the race is going to be crucial, though, Kartik, because if we do have the establishment that wins, so it's either Carter or Cordero, yes, there's going to be big issues that need to be resolved and worked on, but it's still going to continue in the same path it's on right now. Things will change, improvements will be made, but it's, for the most part, going to be status quo. It's going to be par for the course. Now, the reform candidates, whether it's Martino or Winaldo or others, those are going to be more likely to make changes, some big changes in the structure of U.S. soccer. These are changes that are probably going to upset a lot of people, whether it's calendar changes or if it's changes to the way that the TV contracts are done, where some doesn't have so much power in negotiating these contracts and actually gives more of this funding from these contracts to U.S. soccer so they can filter that down into from grassroots all the way up, rather than a lot of it going to the majority of going to Major League Soccer. So I think it is extremely important, depending on which way it goes, because it is going to have long-lasting an impact on the growth of soccer in the United States, whether it's slow growth or rampant growth. Having said that, though, too, Kartik, there are bigger issues than just the election itself. There's some huge, massive problems. You look through all levels of U.S. soccer, and you see that there's areas for improvement. We're behind on a lot of things, everything from scouting to, pay to play, solidarity payments. There's some huge issues that need to be resolved. But I think it comes down to this election, Kartik. I think this really will determine which path we go down. And at this point, I think the election, it's too close to call. I think it's going to go right down to the wire, and it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, at the start of this campaign, pay to play was the major issue, Chris. And I think that was the thing that was so obvious to people, because of Sunil Gulati's need to defend pay to play. And that was percolating up as the root cause of all the US's problems. Now, as the race has evolved, Soccer United marketing has become the lightning rod issue. And that's a much more immediate concern, right? About monies now and media contracts now versus pay to play, which is a longer term thing. Nonetheless, when Brian Dunseth, the co-host of the SiriusXM show Counterattack that I was on the other night, read off to me the list of issues, starting with pay to play, that have been encompassed in this race. It's about 30 issues, which shows you demonstrates to you the kind of problems the U.S. soccer system has, the controversies within it, the factions within it, and the reality that there is a sense that we have to do better. And I think when you evaluate this, the question becomes: do you continue on with the status quo and assume that they hear? Because the problem is they're pretty tone deaf, right? The status quo. We've seen that time and again, and Kyle Martino has talked about that, about how distant they are viewing everything from 30,000 feet, or how they're protected from the actual public sentiment. Or do you make a radical break and bring in Eric Winalda, who has the most radical ideas and has cultivated support of people who are either seen as kind of gadflies in the U.S. soccer community, or are simply fans of European football and don't watch domestic soccer? And that's very much Winalda's space, including, and then the adult leagues who feel like they're being screwed by Soccer House, the NASL and NISA contingent, Peter Wilt and Rocco Camiso, Ricardo Silva, et cetera, who obviously are major stakeholders in the game of this country, but view the business very differently than Major League Soccer does. One thing I would point out also about this race, and I mentioned this on Counterattack with Dunseth and Harks, was that one of the biggest issues in terms of how voters are going to vote now, all the noise is about some on the macro level, has become the governance issues of how Sunil Gulati has arbitrarily governed, in the opinions of many people in and around the game, and the standards for state soccer associations being written by what are essentially bureaucrats and not soccer people. So there are these really kind of grassroots issues, which is, hey, let's say you're in the state of Washington, and Washington State Soccer Association isn't happy with the directives that have come from U.S. soccer, which are being written by people who are bureaucrats or people who come from other sports, and the soccer coaches and soccer professionals whose entire life is dedicated to the sport, are saying none of these things make sense. There's similar issues around the referees, but just in summary, there are a lot of kind of grassroots micro issues that people may not be aware of that may actually determine the outcome of this race. Now, if it comes down to that, neither Cordero or Carter will win. It'll be, or although maybe Cordero was satisfied people that, hey, he would govern differently than Sunil. He certainly had some criticism of that. But it might end up being, that might be the lane for a Gans or a Winograd to drive through because they understand youth soccer. They're both former players. In the case of Winograd played abroad. In the case of Gans, he's worked closely with Premier League clubs. They may have an inside track that way when we get to a third or fourth ballot. So we'll see. It's going to be fascinating. Fascinating process it's been. It is very important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. That's how I would close.
Yeah, I wrote a piece this week on worldsoccertalk.com where I talked about how the Sunil Gulati really and U.S. soccer have been riding the coattails of the U.S. women's national team and the U.S. men's national team for all of the success that they've had in the past 2 decades, whether it's Olympic golds, whether it's Women's World Cup medals, gold winning that, for the men's national team reaching quarterfinals and kind of defying the odds and actually doing much punching above their weight in a lot of these major tournaments. And I think in many ways that then Sunil Gulati have kind of ridden those coattails and has gotten a free ride because there's so many other issues in this game that have not been addressed. And for me, I mean, it does go back to that Sum issue. I mean, back in 2006, when Sum stepped in to acquire the World Cup rights and it put together a deal that then would broadcast those on ESPN and that then MLS would be featured prominently promoting that. At that time, I mean, that was like, 12 years ago. That was an important part of the growth of the game in this country. 12 years later, I don't think we need Sum. I think in many ways, U.S. soccer should be doing these deals directly or indirectly, but doing these deals themselves rather than having Sum, which is owned by Major League Soccer, doing the deals for them. So I think U.S. soccer as a national organization is missing out on a huge amount of revenue and opportunities that they're instead going to Major League Soccer and Sum. And while a lot of people think that I think U.S. soccer and Major League Soccer are on the same page and have the same goals, I disagree. I mean, U.S. soccer has such a much larger role to play in this country, from the grassroots, from the basic levels through to the referees, to organizations, to the women's game, to, I mean, you name it. Such a huge country.
Right. Let me just jump in there, Chris. Sorry to cut you off, but I want to point this out. U.S. soccer does not just govern the professional game in this country, and that's the problem. That is the fundamental problem with everything. We could go on for an hour and talk about this. It has become an entity that, even though they do all these bureaucratic things with the referees and with the amateur game and with the women, that has become simply an extension of the top men's professional league in the country.
Right.
That is the fundamental issue in this campaign. Yeah. That is it.
And Major League Soccer shouldn't be calling the shots. I mean, that's Correct. The thing. And even if you go back to the U.S. men's national team World Cup qualifying campaign and even bring in Bruce Arena, who's had a good career as a club coach and has had a decent career as a national team coach many, many years ago, bringing him in and against Trinidad, playing mostly almost an all MLS team, of players that are aging, that were not the best players available. And to me, you should not have MLS have such a huge influence, influence on the entire state of the U.S. men's national team and U.S. soccer. So a lot of this does come back to the Sum TV deals. And to me, for the 2022, is that needs to end. That the next TV deal should be separate. U.S. soccer and the men's team and the women's team should have a separate deal than Major League Soccer. Major League Soccer at this point in time doesn't need to have a big brother kind of helping them out on these deals. They're strong enough to have their own TV deals by themselves. And putting them together does not make sense. Now, Kartik, this is definitely the most competitive race in recent history for the USSF presidential election. In Sunil Gulati's last 3 times that he's run for office as USSF president, each time he ran unopposed. This time, there's 8 candidates. It is very, very close to call. I think in many ways, my kind of analysis is that Ronaldo started off extremely strong, very strong in the beginning of this campaign. But in the last few weeks, it's fizzled. And towards the end of this campaign, meanwhile, Carlo Martino started off pretty weak and not that strong at all, but has finished extremely strong in this campaign. And in many ways has been acting very presidential in the last few weeks, whether it's on conference calls or for just interviews, and also social media, extremely active on social media. And then you've got Kathy Carter, who's practically invisible, has been only doing select interviews, but has not been saying much at all during those interviews. And Cordero, who's been sharing more information, but again, not doing a lot of interviews. And then you have all the other candidates. And it's just, unfortunately, the timing of this is unfortunate for the other candidates because there's just so many people running in this race. It's hard to be able to sink your teeth in and analyze all of them. You probably have a better idea in terms of each of the other candidates and what the strengths that they bring to the table. Now, Kartik, I will close on this. On WorldSoccerTalk.com this week, we endorsed Eric Ronaldo and Kyle Martino. And the reason I endorsed both of these guys is that both of them have strong campaigns overall, but it's more so the policies and what they stand for and then the ideas and changes that they are going to make. I think, Kartik, personally speaking, this is just me, but I think that if there was a way for a coalition for these guys to work together, perhaps also bringing in Hope Solo, Winograd, Steve Gans, and Caligiuri, that would be the way to go. I just don't know whether or not these guys and these people on these the other six candidates essentially, whether they're going to be able to actually form a coalition and then some type of way to actually be able to defeat the establishment. What are your thoughts on that?
That's ideally what I would like as well. So I want to see those six candidates work together and try and bring some degree of change and work out the roles on the fly, maybe. But it's going to be difficult. There are a lot of personalities there. There are a lot of people there who feel like they should be the president of U.S. soccer. So we'll see. It's going to be an exciting 48 hours from the time we're recording to when this thing is determined. 48, 52 hours or so from the time we're recording.
All right, so Orlando will be there soon. Fox Sports is going to be covering the event on Saturday morning on FS2, I think in between the Bundesliga games. It will be live streamed on USSoccer.com as well as YouTube. So if you're a soccer fan in the United States, I definitely urge you to follow this one because this is going to have a big impact. And even if you don't follow Major League Soccer or some of the other leagues in the United States, it's still going to have a big impact. So whether it's your kids or your future kids, or just local organizations. A lot of this depends on how this goes with this election. So I encourage you to definitely tune in and watch and see what happens and see if democracy, how it works in U.S. soccer. Now, Kartik, where can listeners find you on the internet if you want to catch up on your latest interviews or discussions or thoughts?
You can find me at KKFLA737 on Twitter and various places on the net, writing, including WorldSoccerTalk.com.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday. Every episode is released on SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Audio Boom, and WorldSoccerTalk.com. If you like the show, share it with your friends on social media and give us a review on iTunes. We'd greatly appreciate it. And Kartik, if they're not watching the election this weekend, what should they do?
Enjoy your football.